everybody, and welcome to Sunday, Championship Sunday. South Carolina taking on Iowa in just a little bit in the national championship, going for their third title in program history. He's intern Joe. I'm Mike Yuva. We are at the Garnet Trust headquarters, the official watch party of Garnet Trust for the national championship at Home Team BBQ down in Columbia. People are slowly starting to make their way in, and you can see kind of just all over 5 Points, Joe. It is starting to pack up. I mean, I'm just looking at some of the bars. People are starting to come out. It is going to be exciting in Columbia, no question about it. It's going to be exciting in Cleveland if you're out there as well. But we'll do our best to be able to break it all down for you here on the Gamecock Central pregame show. Joe, this is a matchup of two teams that know each other very, very well. You think back to last season, you think how close South Carolina was to being able to complete the perfect season. Of course, if they won that game against Iowa last year, they would have advanced to the national championship. This year, circumstances a little bit different, but you're still going up against the same team. The only difference is you win today, you're a national champ.
Yeah, Mike, I mean, this is one of the biggest games in women's college basketball history, right? You've got the rematch of the Final Four game last year, and you have South Carolina coming in 37-0 to this one, facing off against one of the best players we've ever seen in women's basketball history, in Caitlin Clark. So a matchup of two titans in the game right now, Mike. And if you're not excited for this one, I don't know what you're doing, right? It should really be good basketball game ahead of us. And if you look at the South Carolina side, you beat NC State pretty handily. It was close for that first half, and then you stepped on the gas right out of the gates in the third quarter, scoring 29 to NC State 6, and it seemed over from there, and you were able to kind of pace with them for the fourth quarter. But like going into this one, I mean it's ridiculous, the hype behind this one, and should be a really good game, and we'll get into previewing it a little bit more. But the excitement certainly building around Columbia.
So, look, South Carolina, as we mentioned, there's so much on the line today. We're talking about the perfect season. We're talking about being able to win another national championship. And if Dawn Staley's able to do that, I mean, certainly what she's already been able to accomplish in her career, but to be able to win 3, now you're really starting to put yourself in the elite of the elite. You need to be able to win today, though. And I think, look, we're going to talk about Caitlin Clark. We're going to be talking about what South Carolina has to do in order to win this game. But I think a lot of it goes just back to what we've been talking about with this team throughout the entire season. And that's just being able to play your style of basketball, your brand of basketball. A lot of the things that we talked about the other day heading into that North Carolina State game, being able to control the tempo, control the pace. That wasn't the case for USC until they got into the third quarter. Once they got into the third quarter, it was a completely different game. It was their style of basketball, and we saw just how dominant they were. I think for at one point, it was like a 26-5 run or something like that to begin the third quarter. It was just something stupid. That's what you need to be able to do today. Certainly with what Iowa did the other day, not being able to come out, play their style of basketball, not being able to knock down some shots that Caitlin Clark is accustomed to making, it changed the way Iowa had to play. And I think, as we mentioned before, if South Carolina went up against Iowa, or if South Carolina went up against UConn, right, trying to look at what would you rather have, UConn, we knew at this point of the year, because of all the injuries, how thin they were going to be on the bench. And I think as the game played out against Iowa the other night, that's the reason why Iowa was able to take advantage of a very depleted team. UConn only played with 7 players. So I say that because, look, the difference is if you're able to get Iowa into a funk early on, they're not going to have the luxury of going up against a team who is playing shorthanded. If anything, South Carolina has one of the deepest benches in all of women's college basketball, and we've seen that throughout the course of the season. If they want to go to their bench, if they want to play 10-plus people, they have the ability to do that because they have the playmakers who have proven, not just earlier in the season in non-conference games, but they have proven time after time against some of the best teams in the country that they can deliver. So I think today, more than anything, Joe, it sounds cliche to say, but they really need to be able to control their style ball because, like we've seen many times this season, but especially just this past game, the first quarter versus the third quarter, watch the difference in this team when they're able to go out there and do the things that they ultimately want to do. I don't know what the heck Dawn Staley said to the team at halftime the other day. Boy, would I love to see that cut in the championship edition on the DVD or whatever the heck they'd put it out if they do win it all. But I would love to see what she said because those girls came out in the second half and they were flying around and they just dominated NC State from start to finish in that third quarter, but really the entire second half.
Yeah, Mike. I mean, that just shows you the brilliance of Dawn in that one. You know, the halftime speech had really got him going, and you know, you want to start that way. In this one against Caitlin Clark, right? You cannot come out flat in a national championship. You know, plain and simple. So against Caitlin Clark, I think Dawn had a game plan last year, right? And my stance on it is that the shooting went cold. Your off didn't quite get as much, and Aaliyah Boston didn't have as much room there in the post to work as she normally did. And that's how I will win the game. But now you have guards. The guard play is really what speaks out to me, in terms of what's different between last year's matchup and this one. Is the guard play. South Carolina is loaded on guards. Raven Johnson is on her own little revenge tour after Caitlin Clark waved her off. ESPN put out a story about that. Really good work there. But yeah, you have a lot of hungry guards, and then you also have Camila Cardoso, who's one of the best players in the country, and reminded everyone who she was against NC State, finishing with 22. And then, I mean, also I did shout out Ashlyn Watkins, 20 points or 20 boards. I mean, off the bench, I believe, for Watkins. That's ridiculous, right? Her reading numbers are insane. And she really goes up and gets them. So when you have players like that just up and down your roster, Mike, it can lead to things. And I think that's really the difference here when you talk about this year versus last year for this game.
So let's just get right into it. You're talking about the matchup between South Carolina and Iowa, and certainly when you talk about Iowa, it starts with Caitlin Clark. Now, their style of basketball is much different in comparison to a lot of teams across the country, and that's because they rely on Caitlin shooting the ball sometimes 25 plus times a game, So having said that, we know that the strategy for Iowa is to get the ball in Caitlin Clark's hand and to let her play her style of game. Now, I think one thing and I think obviously a lot of people have been paying attention to what's been going on with Iowa this postseason, and it's enjoyable. It's enjoyable basketball. If you're a fan of women's college basketball and you paying attention to the Gamecocks, but put that aside, you just want to watch another team out there, Iowa's a fun team because it's just something different. It's something unique. It's something that you don't see from a lot of teams when you talk about the style of play. But now you got to go up against it. And one thing that Caitlin has done a really good job of this season, despite the fact that she shoots the ball so many times and she'll shoot it from between the three-point line and half court, a lot of times it feels like, is she does do a good job of distributing the basketball. She gets her teammates involved. So to me, Joe, I don't know if Dawn's going to come out and try to double team her. I don't think that's going to be the case. I wouldn't be shocked if we do see it at times. I think more than anything, though, if God forbid Caitlin Clark goes off in the first half today, I think the difference between this year and last year is Dawn's gone through it. And I think Dawn will be like, hey, look, we went through this last year. We're not doing this again. I'm sure the game plan is going to be a little bit different of how they want to guard her, whether that be putting Raven Johnson on her, whether that be putting Malaysia at times on there. I think Raven, and we talk more so about Raven and the disrespect on the flip side of it, right? And you mentioned it, how Caitlin kind of waved her off when she was shooting that three, like, kind of just leave her out there, let her shoot it. But I think, if anything, it's going to motivate her to play even tougher defense today on Caitlin. And certainly with what you saw in that UConn game in that first half and how disruptive the Huskies were to slowing down Clark's momentum and just rhythm in general, I think if you can get that from Raven Johnson in the first half, I mean, shoot, Raven doesn't even need to score today, in my opinion. If she goes out there, kind of has one of those Bree Beal games, we talked so much about the impact Bree Beal had during that 2022 season, that championship run. Bree would go out there. Yeah, she'd have some games where she would score in double digits. Might be 10, might be 12. But a lot of times, more times than not, she was scoring maybe 4, 6, 8 points. And a lot of it had to do with the fact that she was playing defense. Her job, more than anything, was to stop the number one player on the opposing team. And if that's what Raven Johnson has to do today, I'm sure if there's anyone on this team, Raven Johnson will be like, give me that job, give me that responsibility up against that player in particular, because it's kind of personal for me this year.
Yeah, I certainly think it's going to go between Raven and Fulwiley, right? I think Fulwiley's a heck matchup coming off the bench, right? If you're talking about a number two to be guarding Caitlin Clark, Fulwiley's probably the number two in the country that you would want guarding Caitlin Clark. behind Raven. I think, you're going to see a lot of guards get a crack at it, but I think primarily she will be the primary, defender in Raven Johnson, and Riley obviously will get some looks. We'll see some from Powell. Johnson might also have to guard a little bit. And,
Yep.
obviously, Mike, I mean, you're an athlete, you play basketball, you're going to have a lot of help on defense when you're guarding a shooter like Caitlin Clark. There's going to be picks, there's going to be switches. She's in motion all the time. So you gotta have your eye on her. And I mean, if we can get something, or whoever's on her has to get through, and you have to switch, right? So be ready to switch. And again, that this is gonna show. Dawn's basketball genius is gonna show through how they play defensively against Caitlin Clark, because she's a once in a generational player. So if to win the game, you got to stop her, right? And so I think that's really what it's going to come down to. And Iowa has some other players on the team and stuff like that. But I mean, it really does come down to Caitlin Clark. I mean, Mike, you brought up her assists. She's averaging 9 assists per game, which is crazy. So it's going to be really interesting to see how exactly Dawn plans on stopping Caitlin Clark. But again, I think if any team is capable, it's this one.
Yeah, we mentioned that because I think Mike brings it up. Iowa's a one-person team. There's no question about it that it starts and ends really with Caitlin Clark. But as Joe mentioned, I mean, she's averaging just shy of 10 assists a game. So to me, if I'm South Carolina, I know she likes to pass the basketball at times. Let other players beat you. I mean, if Caitlin's only scoring, 20 points or less, 18 points or less, Iowa knows it. They're not going to win too many games. I mean, she can pass the ball all she wants. They're not going to win many games that way. So I think if you're South Carolina today, force other players to beat you. Let Caitlin pass it off, because honestly, when she gets going, that's the difference. And I think with South Carolina today, I think what we're going to see a team that look, there's the other difference. South Carolina actually plays defense. Iowa really doesn't. And I know the other day UConn had a slow start in that first half. But if you look, I mean, especially when you look at Caitlin Clark, she doesn't play defense. So if I'm South Carolina, we talked about this before at the NC State game. We saw it in the third quarter. It was a little bit slower start than you would have liked. But if you're able to come out there and you're really able to take it to them, right? Go into the paint, take it on Clark. Clark's not going to be able to step up on you and play defense. That's just not her style of play. Take it to her. Take advantage of being able to score early, because as we mentioned, if you're able to control and dictate the tempo of this game, Iowa's not going to know how to react. They're not going to know how to react. So I certainly think the game style is going to be hopefully similar to what we saw that fourth quarter, this past game against NC State. But I think the other thing too is when we look back to last season, and obviously there's so much change between the two teams, certainly for South Carolina with the number of starters that South Carolina lost. But I think the biggest difference is the fact that with this USC team, they're capable of beating you in multiple ways. And I think, if anything, they're going to learn from what took place last year. And I think they're going to come out there and they're going to respond well. You can hear behind me, they have the audio going. They're getting ready for the game tipping off in less than an hour here. We are at Home Team BBQ, which is the official watch party location of Garnet Trust. Garnet Trust is going to be some athletes coming on out here today, some football, men's basketball, some soccer players coming out here to support Dawn Staley and the Gamecocks as they look to go for their third national championship in program history. I remember being in Minnesota 2 years ago and seeing this team win that title. And I think the biggest thing that I took away from that year's team, and even though obviously, again, a lot of new faces on this team in comparison to back then, a lot has changed in those 2 years. But I think the biggest thing that I took was this team did such a great job of ignoring the outside noise, any type of distractions, any type of storylines hovering around them that didn't have to do with playing basketball. And the reason I bring that up is I think back to a quote that Dawn Staley and a lot of these players, even going back to the days when Asia Wilson was playing, but especially over the last couple of years, going back to that 2022 season. Keep the main thing the main thing. Keep the main thing the main thing. And I think with this year's team, they understand what's on the line today. They understand that they can make history by becoming the 10th team in college basketball history for women to be able to go undefeated in a season. They understand what's at stake. But at the same time, too, I truly believe, Joe, with what we've seen with this year's group, They're just so focused on the task at hand that to them, they probably are truly looking at it, as cliche as it sounds. We hear it in sports all the time. They're truly looking at it as, hey, this is just another game. We go out there, we win. Yeah, we know it's on the other side of it, but why make it anything bigger than it has to be? The hoop's the same size, the ball's the same size, the court's the same size. It's 5-on-5 basketball. It's just another game. It's just another game. And I truly believe, based on what we have heard from this team all season long, I think that's how they're going to attack it today.
Yeah, absolutely. Right, Mike? It is. It's a basketball game played in between the lines, 5-on-5, right? Just another – and then afterwards you can celebrate, right? Because I think if you look at it, especially this far in, with the perfect season on the line and the revenge tour for, Raven and just the team in general for Iowa in the Final Four and to reestablish dominance and all of that. If you look into that as a player, that's just – it's a lot to process from a game like that because there is so much – potentially like afterwards that could come your way and so many accolades and all that stuff. But you can't look at that as a player. And, I think they did a good job of that with NC State not looking ahead because, Don had talked about that in some of their struggles earlier on in the tournament when they weren't playing the best basketball. It felt like they were looking ahead to the next matchup. So in the second half of NC State, they came out, they were ready and just, needed to move on, right? So I think it's good for this team now. There's nobody to look ahead to. This is it, right? Just, one game. Go out there and play your best, give everything you've got, and for the national championship, right, Mike? So a lot of motivation going into this one, and plenty of storylines, and it's crazy that this team, is somehow still, I guess, the underdog, I guess you can say, right? Like, this team doesn't think they're being talked about enough, and we always like to talk about it, the Kirby Smart school of, underselling your team or thinking or telling your team that, everyone's doubting you, right? So Don's got that going for him, and realistically, like a lot of people are talking about Caitlin Clark too. So that's certainly another layer of motivation to this one, Mike. Another storyline to watch for sure.
So I bring up the Iowa stats for you, and not a surprise, right? It's the Caitlin Clark show. You look at points, you look at the leader in assists, you look at the leader in rebounds, steals. The only thing that she doesn't lead the team in is in blocks. So when we try to preview this team, again, we understand that everything starts and everything ends, everything goes through Caitlin Clark. But if South Carolina wants to be able to win this game, it's also having to play defense against some other players too. As I mentioned, if South Carolina is able to stop Clark and they force her to pass the ball off to other teammates, which she did last game, she had to. If her shot's not dropping, she doesn't have a choice. Hannah Stukely, forward, she's averaging just over 14 points a game. Kate Martin, she's averaging 13. And then after that, the rest of the team is averaging in single digits. So, again, no surprise that everything is going through Caitlin Clark. I think more than anything, Joe, what I want to see from this team is if Clark comes in the paint, right? Obviously, she likes to shoot a lot of threes, but if she comes in the paint, I want South Carolina to make damn sure they send a message to her, right? Give her a little elbow, Basketball is a contact sport. They always say, oh, football's a contact sport. No. Basketball is a contact sport. Football is a collision sport. So she comes in the paint, let her know that it's not going to be easy. If you want to come into the paint, Caitlin, it's not going to be easy. Cardoso, they're going to have the bigs ready to go. Kits, they're going to be ready. They're going to be ready. And if you want to come into the paint, just realize you're going to have to work for every basket. Force her to beat you from the outside. Obviously, she's one of the best we've ever seen in women's basketball from behind the arc. There's no question about that. But I bring this up simply to say, if she does struggle for whatever reason, it happened the other game. Do I expect that to be the case today? No, I expect her to come out and to shoot the ball pretty well. And a lot of that depends on the defense that South Carolina presents. But sometimes, as we've seen, you could be right on her. You could be right on her, and she still makes shots. If she's not making shots, though, what is she going to have to do? She's going to have to do what she did against UConn, drive and dish. And if she takes it to the paint, make sure that you remind her that it's not going to be easy because South Carolina is one of the best defensive teams in the country. And we hear it all the time in sports. Defense wins championships. They're going to have to play their best game defensively today. They're going to have to play their best game defensively today because when you look at this Iowa team, especially when Clark is able to get things going, they put up a lot of points, Joe. They put up a lot of points. But I also think, too, that Iowa has not seen a defense like South Carolina's. And I think that will be ultimately the difference today when we go back and watch this game.
Yeah, Mike. I mean, there are some shots Caitlin Clark takes where, I mean, you couldn't really guard her in a phone booth, right? Like it's crazy. It's the efficiency that she shoots at in the range, and I mean, she makes it with people in her face consistently. So, you really have to be disciplined. Make sure you can't get any airspace. As soon as if she's not on the ball, guard her. Make sure she can't get the ball. Make it hard for her. And like you do, make her to go into the paint, make her shoot the three, and then hope it goes dry. With plenty of pressure and defense with that. So, it's going to be one hell of a matchup.
Well, here's the tail of the tape. We'll take a quick look at Iowa first. You see what they've had to accomplish this tournament to get to this point. They've had to go through teams like LSU and UConn in particular these last two games. And look, that LSU game, in a lot of ways, Joe, and granted, UConn held their own despite the injuries that they've been dealing with this tournament. I think a lot of people looked at that LSU Iowa matchup saying that could be the team, South Carolina, if they're fortunate to get out of their side of the bracket and get on into the championship again. That likely could be the team that they're going to have to play in the championship. And, well, here we are. That was an absolute dogfight. It was a dogfight for Iowa to be able to beat UConn the other night, and that Final Four matchup came down to the very last seconds. A call that a lot of people will be talking about for many years. But the bottom line is Iowa was able to benefit from that, and they're playing against South Carolina today. And as you see, what we were talking about before, Selke scoring 23 points. It was not Clark's night the other night. Do I expect Clark to come out and have another cold game? I don't. She's a hell of a player. I really don't. And Dawn Staley, Raven Johnson, I mean, go down the list of the players and the coaches. This South Carolina team, they're not going to be looking at banking on, okay, you know what? Well, maybe Clark will have another bad game. I don't think that's going to be the case. So you have to make it extremely difficult for her. If, God forbid, she's able to get things going in the first half, I would not be shocked to see Dawn get creative and change things up in the second half in a way that we didn't see in the second half last year. I truly believe this, that Dawn went into the game, because a lot of these coaches do. A lot of these coaches go in saying, hey, we do things a certain way. We're going to continue to do that. And when you're South Carolina, especially last season, could you blame them? Could you blame them heading into the game having that mentality? Well, what happens? Clark was able to go off, and she's obviously been one of the best players this season too. So I think we saw that from LSU a little bit too. I think Mulkey went into this year's game thinking, hey, we play our own style of ball. We're going to do it the way we've been doing it all season. And they didn't make adjustments throughout the course of the game. So I feel like if, God forbid, that were to happen today, I don't think Dawn's going to allow that to happen in the second half. But we'll see. I mean, again, I was going up against a phenomenal South Carolina defense. We said this last year, though, in that Final Four matchup. The difference, though, was Aaliyah Boston got into foul trouble early. Iowa had a game plan. Iowa's game plan was, okay, yeah, we have a phenomenal shooter, but let's take it into the paint and let's try to get Aaliyah into foul trouble. Cardoso, you cannot afford to have that happen today. You saw what Cardoso was able to do last game, especially in that second quarter, late first quarter into the second quarter before she rolled her ankle. Unfortunately, she was all right and came back, but you can't afford to lose anybody today. There's all hands on deck, especially when you go up against a team like Iowa, Joe.
Yeah, I mean, like we were just talking about, Mike. You got to be on your game. No airspace. I mean, you can't let her, have any room to shoot, because if you do, she'll make it. Especially after a rough shooting night. Shooters are streaky, right? And so after a bad night, you're going to be out there coming out shooting for your next screen, your next make. So she's hunting for a game where she can get going early. And so, again, from the opening tip, Mike, you have to be disciplined on defense. You really do.
Let's take a look at what South Carolina's had to do to get to this point. Obviously, Gamecock fans know this path very well because you've been following it all postseason. The wins against NC State, and I'd even say, I mean, honestly, the last three games, they were able to get things going from a momentum standpoint in that third quarter, and they were able to carry it into the fourth. But a lot of these games, Joe, Indiana, Oregon State, NC State, it's really been games where South Carolina has struggled for at least a half. So that was the difference in the Indiana and Oregon State game. Fortunately, they were able to come out and win both those games. But the reason I bring that up is at points it looked like South Carolina was just going to run away with both those games, right? And what happened? Well, Oregon State started to fight back. Indiana started to fight back. And they found themselves in situations where the game was a little bit closer than it was at one point, whether they were leading by 15 or 20 or whatever the case may be. That happened multiple times this run, and that happens in sports. But when you get to this point, there's no tomorrow. There's no tomorrow. So we mentioned that NC State game. Truly, it comes down to being able to come out and playing the style of basketball that you were able to do in that second half against NC State. That's why I said, and it's not like I was saying anything that was like reinventing the wheel or, Pat Summitt or John Wooden, but more than anything, after creating that momentum to end the third quarter, the way they absolutely dominated NC State to take a commanding lead heading into that fourth, it was about forgetting the score. Forget about the score. Continue to keep that foot on the pedal and continue to create this momentum, because that momentum will hopefully translate over into the next game. And of course, that next game being the national championship today. So would I be shocked to see USC come out and just start shooting lights out? No, I wouldn't, because they needed a game like that. They needed a game as of late. They had it early on. We saw it against North Carolina. We saw what they were able to do. They need to be able to continue that today. And if they do get a slow start, hey, you know what? It's a long game. And you're going to have your opportunities to score against this team, because Iowa's not a team that's phenomenal defensively. They're a team that relies on being able to put up points. So I still think this game, if you're a gambler, I think the over-under is around like 160. I'm taking the under today. Because I think from a possession standpoint, they're going to be crucial. I think it's going to be tough to score. Despite both these teams being very good scoring teams, I think it's going to be tough to score for Iowa, because they haven't seen a defense like South Carolina. And for USC, I think even though they like to play up-tempo, I'm not going to be shocked to see them slow it down a little bit to do their best to take the ball out of Caitlin Clark's hands. And how do you do that? Well, you control the tempo. You don't take as many shots. So I think that's another thing to pay attention to. Sometimes the best defense is having a good offense. We say that a lot in football. That could be the case today for South Carolina, trying to limit the number of possessions that Clark and Iowa was able to have today.
Yeah, definitely, Mike. I mean, I think it's going to be like a chess match, right? You have two really good head coaches, the coach of the year, the Naismith coach of the year, and Dawn Staley, going up against the best player in college basketball, and Caitlin Clark, right? So this is going to be a chess game. It always was. And I think, that was a good point about limiting possessions, right? I think, it's going to be a little bit more than just,
Alex brings it up.
Pushing pace. Yeah.
Yep, Alex brings it up.
Absolutely.
I mean, that's the thing, Alex. I mean, certainly the matchup between South Carolina's offense and South Carolina's defense and Iowa's offense, that's one thing that we're going to talk a lot about, right? But just because the way Iowa plays defensively, or the lack thereof, it certainly could be the difference today. But being able to control, Joe, to cut you off there, being able to control the tempo, I think it can help USC's offense out a lot.
Oh, yeah, definitely. Absolutely. And I mean, you saw it work, in the men's game. Lamont Paris' team likes to do that a lot, right? So, and I mean, what that comes down to, right, to Alex's point, right, the shot makers got to hit shots. Tahina Pau got to hit shots, right? Raven Johnson, this offense just has to hit shots. You don't have to be immaculate from the three-point line to win this game, but you do have to hit, a couple. You can't be ice cold from the three-point line all game, which I fully expect them to, be in perfect shape and be ready to go. It's not going to be a miserable shooting night for South Carolina by any means, but you need to step up when you're called on the offense, or when you get the ball and have an open shot. Be ready to shoot. Don't tense up. Be ready to play, because this is basketball at the end of the day, like we mentioned.
Well, we're just over 40 minutes away from South Carolina and Iowa tipping off in Cleveland for this year's national championship. Dawn Staley and the Gamecocks looking to claim their third championship in program history, while they're also trying to make sure Iowa does not win their first in program history. As you see behind me, more people starting to come on in here at Home Team BBQ down in 5 Points in Columbia, the official headquarters for the watch party for Garnet Trust. And I believe I just saw Lenore Sellers walk on by, the Gamecock quarterback, and some of the players trying to see if he's out there. But I keep seeing some players coming on in. So if we have one of these football or soccer or whoever, one of these Gamecock student athletes come on in here, we'll see if we can get them to hop on with us for a little bit as they're out here today to support their Gamecocks. Joe, from a legacy standpoint, when we think about what the Gamecocks have been able to accomplish in the past, being able to win championships, being able to win two, you think back to the year with Asia Wilson, 2017. You think back to 2 seasons ago, 2022 in Minnesota, Aaliyah Boston leading the way. If South Carolina is able to win this game today, I think we would all agree that it's going to take a team effort. But if they do win, who are you counting on to step up the most?
Yeah, I mean, I've Cardoso, and then I think, I'm going to give you two because, I know you want one player, so I'm going to give you two, right? As it usually works. But I've got Cardoso. Yeah, I've got Cardoso and I've got Raven Johnson, right? I think, Full Wiley off the bench is going to be good. A lot of people are going to be talking about Full Wiley after this game, but Raven Johnson, it's her time to shine. And, she hasn't really had that kind of signature game in the tournament yet where she has, her fingerprints all over it. And, now's the time, right? But I think Full Wiley's going to get talked about a lot. And then Camila Cardoso could also be the difference. You just have to move the ball around, right? It will be the offense. And, I just named pretty much all of the scores in this one. So there you go, Mike. That's, I guess, my
just taking them all.
Players, exactly. Yeah, absolutely. But that's what I think is going to be the difference for sure. Yeah, absolutely.
The only thing to me in terms of why Raven Johnson might not necessarily be the MVP if South Carolina is able to win today is because she might have to take a back seat and sacrifice some of those touches offensively because they're going to be using her more than anything to play on the defensive end to be able to slow down Clark. So if Johnson doesn't get it, if they are able to win today, I still think that she might be one of the more valuable players for this team simply because they have to play good defense in this game. They have to be able to slow down Clark. They have to be able to limit her and not allow her to get into the type of rhythm that she was able to in the second half, but more so what we've seen throughout the course of the season. So I think that's a good one. I think Cardoso, we've seen, and again, the makeup of this team's different from 2 years ago. The makeup of this team's different from that 2017 team. But what we've seen from South Carolina in years past, they've depended on their big in games like this. We saw Aaliyah Boston dominate in that 2022 championship game. We saw what Asia Wilson was able to do in that 2017 game, Joe. So I would not be shocked, to piggyback off of what you said, if they are able to win today, Cardoso being a big reason. And if she's able to join that elite company of being a finals MVP, she would certainly deserve it because I think she's going to be getting it done on both ends of the court today.
Yeah, most definitely. And I would foresee, Cardoso, because she's going to get the points, she's going to get the rebounds, and then she'll also have a couple blocks in there, right? If you're talking about the stat sheet, it'll be a spread out day. But again, you got to talk about Ashlyn Watkins, right? You need rebounds to win the game, and she's going to be, key, right? It's going to be big. I really expect her to have a big game against NC State. And, she's very big in how South Carolina executes offensively, right? Because if those rebounds keep coming and you continue to push the pace offensively, but again, it starts on the defensive end and it starts with defensive boards. If you're allowing Iowa to get offensive rebounds, that's not good because that just means Caitlin Clark has the ball for that much more possessions and that many more shots and whatnot. So rebounds, you got Iowa get to the offensive glass. I think South Carolina obviously has the advantage there, but if you can take care of that box, I think after that it kind of just comes down to the offense.
I'm going to give you another name. I mean, we're practically naming the whole friggin' team here at this point who could potentially be the MVP if they win this game. What about Pau? Because if Raven Johnson, if she is asked, Absolutely. If she is tasked with having to slow down Caitlin Clark, well, that's going to leave more opportunities to the other guard to be able to go out there and score. So I don't know if that's necessarily going to be the game plan, but when I think of situations like this and a matchup that, again, I go back to a couple of years ago, it's tough to compare the two. It's not true apples to apples, but just what Dawn Staley did against UConn in that 22 matchup against Paige Beckers and what they did defensively. It wasn't just, okay, Bree Beal's going to be on her the entire game. So that's why today I don't think they're going to just keep Raven Johnson on her the entire game. I think we'll see Full Wiley on her. I think we'll see Pau play on her a little bit, and they'll continue to do what they did. pretty halt. But I think more than anything, Joe, it's being able to keep those fresh legs, kind of like we talk about with hockey, right? I mean, keeping the shift short, being able to throw more guys out there so that you do have more players that are keeping their fresher legs to be able to keep up with Clark, wherever the heck she goes on the court.
Yeah. Exactly. Well, and Mike, like I was saying at the top of the show, you have so many more different options at guard than you did last year, right? You have just different types of guards coming off the bench, and for Wiley, Paul, Raven Johnson, Pow, right? So I think Dawn's gonna, you'll see a little bit of a rotation, but whatever guard decides to give Caitlin Clark the most fits is probably going to be on her for the remainder of the game. But I could see Dawn tweaking with it for a good part of this game, but we'll see whenever. Whoever decides to Caitlin Clark fits or decides to, whenever they can, start to slow her down, I think that's when you start to see it. But you're going to, give her a lot of different looks. You have to. Because if you give her the same look all game, she's going to adjust and you're in trouble, right? So I think the key is to mixing up looks and just kind of find 2 or 3 of the guards that give her the best look and take away all the airspace and don't let her shoot. So it's going to be interesting just to see how Dawn decides to do it and what this rotation looks like. And then also to see who can step up and what, type of guard. Because again, like I said, there's a lot of them on this, on this team can, be the biggest threat to Caitlin Clark's game.
We've mentioned before, at the end of the day, it's another game. But Joe, how much do you think this team, who obviously lost a lot of players from last year, the South Carolina team, how much do you think the players who were here a year ago, they look at this game as a revenge game and an opportunity to be able to get back for what happened last year in a season where South Carolina was so close to making history then?
Oh, Mike, yeah, I think it's huge, right? It's one of the bigger things that this team had circled. It's a very big character trait of Staley was in the Final Four, and then decide to take it the distance next year. We've seen that in past years before. So there's so many storylines in this one, Mike. But I think the revenge tour and the players that aren't here, they got it pretty quickly as soon as they were ingrained in team camp and workouts. Having Iowa on a bulletin board in a locker room, I think everyone kind of understood what that was all about, and everyone picked up on it really quickly. All the transfers did, and now it's one big family, right? This team gelled from early on and being loose and having fun is part of this team's identity. So I fully expect that to happen, and they need to if they want to win this game.
Well, and I think back to the other night following the NC State game, Aaliyah Boston interviewing Dawn Staley, and I'm paraphrasing here, but Dawn essentially said to Aaliyah, we want to be able to get this done for you guys. Now, obviously, at that point, they didn't know who they were going to play. They could have been playing Iowa, could have been playing UConn. But more than anything, you can just get a sense from listening to what Dawn said during that interview that they feel like they let down the freshies by not being able to complete it last year, not being able to get that perfect season. So I think a lot of it has to do with trying to find some extra motivation. Not that this team needs to find any added motivation with what's at stake today, but looking back to how close they were last year and wanting to get it done. Because as Don mentioned, he told Aaliyah, we get this one done, the freshies are getting rings. So it feels like there's even some more added motivation to be able to get this job done, to be able to do something that heading into today, only 9 other teams in women's college basketball history has been able to do, and that's being able to go undefeated in a season. So no question about that. Joe, let's take a quick time out. Let's go check out some ads, and it is tax season, and who can our friends over at Liberty Tax do for so many out in Columbia?
Yeah, Mike, tax ID is an uncertain thing you get right before tax. You don't have to go through it alone. The tax team at Liberty Tax in Irmo, Lexington, and Columbia will walk you through the process. Clear up any confusion. Guarantee you'll get the biggest possible refund or you're back. It's tax time. If you're in a hurry for a refund, call on the tax team at Liberty Tax. They're fast, accurate, guaranteed. On the other hand, if you think you might be owing Uncle Sam, talk to Liberty Tax team to make sure you're not paying more than you should owe. They'll find every possible deduction for you. Locally owned and operated, staffed by tax professionals from your neighborhood. Open 9 to 9 on weekdays and 9 to 5 on Saturdays with multiple service options. Start through the Liberty Tax mobile app or through the desktop portal. Make an appointment or just walk in. Give a call to upload your tax documents. And when you come in, your return will be ready to review and give them a call on your screen right now. 803-462-5576. Once again, 803-462-5576 for all of this tax season, Mike.
And today's show is also brought to you by our good friend Clint Hammond over at Movement Mortgage. If you're in the process of purchasing a home or trying to find the lowest rate in the market, do exactly what our very own Wes Mitchell, as well as former Gamecock quarterback and captain Perry Orth did, and that's give Clint a call. Clint has been a longtime supporter of not just Gamecock Central, but all of these GC Live shows. As Joe pointed it out, you see that name above every one of these GC Live shows. So be sure to give Clint a call and let him know that Gamecock Central sent you. That number is 803-771-6933. We're just over 30 minutes away from tip-off. Gamecocks, Iowa, coming up 3 o'clock as the Gamecocks look to win their third national championship in program history. You can watch this game on ABC as the game tips off in Cleveland, Ohio at the Rocket Mortgage Fieldhouse, home of the Cleveland Cavaliers, as the Gamecocks bring their perfect 37-0 record into this one, while Iowa comes into this matchup at 34-4, finished 15-3 in the Big Ten before going on to win the Big Ten Conference Tournament. Joe, look, we're at a point now where when you look at the makeup of this team and where college basketball is going, I mean, women's basketball continues to get more and more competitive. And if South Carolina is able to get this one done today, I mean, you talk about what they have in the future. We'll have plenty of time in the offseason to be able to talk about what's next for this Gamecock team. But the reason I bring this up today, it's only getting tougher. It's only going to get tougher for teams like South Carolina to be able to be dominant. And that's not to write off Dawn Staley. This is good. The game itself, women's basketball continues to get better. The talent, it's just there's more talent out there. So I bring all that up to say, if they're able to win today, in the beginning of this era, this new era, and I say the beginning, we're still in a new period when we talk about NIL, transfer portal. I think it just speaks even more to the job that Dawn Staley has been able to do, because this is a year heading into the season. Let's call it for what it is. I think a lot of people looked at it being more of a reloading year, right? Maybe Dawn Staley, maybe some of the players, maybe Aaliyah Boston, and some of the freshies who aren't part of the team this year, they probably said, I don't know. I'll never count Dawn Staley out. But this arguably is the best job that she's ever done in her coaching career. If she's able to cap it off with a ring today, it has to go right up there with some of the greatest performances we've seen in college basketball history. And that's no disrespect to Pat Summitt, the late Pat Summitt, Gino Auriemma. It's simply to say this is a new era of college basketball. It could have been real easy for this team to take, I don't want to say a major step back. I mean, let's be honest. They still have a loaded team. But it would have been understandable if this team took a step back simply because of all the talent they lost from a year ago.
Yeah, absolutely, Mike. And I mean, we talk about Caitlin Clark so much, and as much as they're doubting South Carolina and talking about Caitlin Clark, it is good for the game, right? It is really refreshing and awesome to see the women's basketball game being talked about as much as it is, and shout out to Caitlin Clark for that. And I hope it follows into the WNBA and stuff like that. I think it's super awesome, and it's really good for women's basketball. And even though South Carolina is not the team being talked about, it's still really good, and it's going to generate more opportunities for South Carolina in the future, as good as it is. And being in this game, again, I mentioned at the top of the show, arguably one of the biggest women's basketball games in the history of the sport. So be a really, really, really fun one. And we'll see, right? I think if Tawn can do it, we can officially, crown the talk about the dynasty after they get it done. But again, hope they do, right? So going to be one heck of a ball game ahead of us, Mike, and I'm really excited to watch this one.
You see me kind of peeking over the back of my head. I believe that is the pasture of pain. Corey Miller, former Gamecock star on the gridiron, also played just about a decade in the NFL with the New York Giants and Minnesota Vikings. Had a chance to be with Corey yesterday, the Gamecock player, the Gamecock great, the legend player panel at the Shane Beamer Lady Day event, and he was awesome. Steve Tannehill was there as well as the all-time scoring leader in football history, Parker White. So good to see Corey Miller coming out here to support Dawn Staley and the Gamecocks. Had a chance to work with him at Watch Fox, and I know how much support he continues to give those ladies and Dawn. Alex, looks like Alex has a comment, question. Let's see what Alex Jones has to say. They'll be playing the zone. They don't have the size to play man. We will have open shifts because of the zone. We just have to hit them. I mean, that's what it comes down to, Alex, right? I mean, when this team, like that third quarter, I keep going back to, we can go back to the North Carolina game a couple weeks ago. We can go back to some games earlier in the year. But those two games in particular really stand out. No, I got you, Alex. I said shifts, shots. I got you. Those two games in particular really stand out to me because they're so fresh. They're so fresh, right? So I think more than anything, look, you're going to have your opportunities to make shots this game. You're going to have to. You're going to have to. And I think if anything, too, if you're able to take a lead early on this team, to me, I feel like even though Caitlin has been dishing the ball off very well this season, just under 10 assists per game, to me, the competitor in her, I feel like, is just going to want to force a little bit, more, do a little bit more. So I think if USC's, again, able to control the tempo, do what they want to do early on, I think they're really going to be able to dictate the flow of this game and make things uncomfortable for not just Caitlin Clark, but this Iowa team as a whole. Jacob says rebounding on both sides and paint points are the keys to a South Carolina victory, just like it was versus NC State. Feed the thriller, Camilla.
Smart man. Yeah, Jacob, I was just talking about that, the rebounding battle. Because again, defensively, you have to get the defensive rebound. You cannot give Caitlin Clark more opportunity to shoot the basketball. So that's, rule number one. But then, get off rebounds, more shots in your hands. And then also, I did have a point for Alex's too, so this kind of works. But yeah, I think, in a zone, right, if you need an offensive rebound, they're playing zone. All it is moving the rock, right? That's how you beat a zone. Move the rock, trust your teammates. And, I think this is the perfect team to go up against that offensively because they have guards that they can trust now. They have guards that have established themselves in many guards, right? So it's really good for South Carolina, this matchup from an offensive standpoint. And again, you just got to move the rock and trust yourself throughout the whole game, right? I think, this game is going to have its ups and downs. And if you trust what you're doing on the defensive end, offensively, you just literally just have to, continue to do what you're doing and you should have a good game. And if the shooting falls off, continue to play defense, continue to generate chances, I think is the recipe in this one, Mike.
A couple notes to make from our very own Chris Welbon, who is in Cleveland, has done a phenomenal job, not just this tournament for Gamecock Central, but all season. He is one of the best minds when it comes to women's basketball, and has done a phenomenal job for Gamecock Central for many years. I remember working with Chris at Watch Fox, and he was still working at Gamecock Central on the side because that's how much he cares about women's basketball. So if you are trying to find some information leading up to today's game, or you want to be able to pay attention to what's going on as far as what's being said on the message board, head on over to Gamecock Central, and Chris will be able to give you all the tidbits as he watches in live time. A couple things that Chris mentioned, though, that I want to point out in this game. Molly Davis for Iowa. She has not played this postseason. Coach Blunder for Iowa suggested that she might only be able to get on the court for a few seconds. She shoots over 40% from three and is a good ball handler who can give Clark a break. So that's one thing that Iowa hasn't had this postseason. It sounds like if Davis does get out there at all, doesn't seem like she's going to be able to give them that much time. So that's why, another reason why, if you're able to really tie her, or, God forbid, get Caitlin Clark somehow into foul trouble early, they don't have that carbon copy. It's really tough to say that anyone's a carbon copy of Caitlin Clark, but Davis certainly being one of those players who can help out. But again, doesn't look like she's going to be able to give much time, if any time, if she is able to go today. Another thing that Wilbon mentioned as he gets ready for his coverage in Cleveland, South Carolina has been very tight-lipped with its game plan. That's one thing that we talked about earlier in this show, Joe. We don't know the matchup. The game plan is to win, was all Johnson said. Tessa Johnson said, it's just to win. But look for Bree Hall, Tessa Johnson, long defenders to get turns. Malaysia Fulwiley, who is aggressive but sometimes undisciplined defender, might also get a turn, as Wilbon writes. So keep an eye on that. And we also threw out Raven Johnson being able to get into the mix there as well. I think really more than anything, Joe, as we continue to roll along, we'll wrap this thing up in a little bit to let you guys get ready. But I think more than anything, you read some of the things that Chris just said there. You hear some of the things that not just us, but the analysts, some of the players and coaches had to say yesterday during their media availabilities. I think, honestly, what it just comes down to is You understand what you have to do in a game like this. Iowa's not going to come out. It's not like you're going up against a team who throws the football. Let's do a football analogy here. It's not like you're going up against a team who spreads it out and they're going to come out and run the triple option or the wishbone. You know, this is a team that likes to play through Caitlin Clark. You know what they want to do. They're not going to surprise you by any means. And if Davis does play a little bit, again, it's not going to really change the strategy and the style of play that Iowa likes to play with. So what it comes down to is you know what the task is at hand. You understand your opponent very well. You went up against them and came up short last year. You know what you have to do today. And I think, if anything, it just comes down to execution, as cliche as that may sound.
Yeah, Mike, absolutely. Lynn says CC does not know how to play defense. She reaches rather than moving her feet. Something you need to capitalize on, especially in a zone when you're moving the ball around the point. Bianca says getting Iowa in foul trouble early in the game may be best bet. South Carolina has touched in their bench, so many shooters, but the key of the game is to lock down defense. Absolutely.
Craig, a good friend from Georgia, wine testing, saying hello. What's going on, Craig? Good to have you, and good to have everyone on joining us, watching on Facebook, Twitter, YouTube, wherever, as you guys get ready to watch South Carolina go for another national championship tip-off just over 20 minutes away. Again, if you're just joining us, you can see behind us a little watch party here, the official watch party of Garnet Trust, as so many are starting to come on out to show their support for the Gamecocks in this game today at 3. There's going to be some Gamecock student athletes coming on by. I believe Dante Reno, Lenore Sellers, a couple of them are going to be down here, some soccer players as well. So if you're looking to watch the game, if you're in a pinch right now, I tell you right now, I can kind of see a lot of the bars from where I am at Home Team BBQ, and there's some long lines out there. It's a beautiful day too, but if you want to be able to watch the game, you're trying to find a spot, maybe you're like, hey, I was on the fence about going out somewhere, come on by, watch it with a bunch of Gamecocks. It's going to be a good time over at Home Team BBQ. It doesn't cost anything to come on in. We're going to be back in the patio area, and we'll be doing a post-game show afterwards as well. So hopefully it will be a fun post-game show for Gamecock fans, and we will do that immediately after the game, win or lose. All right, JoJo, final thoughts on this game before we wrap things up.
Mike, it's a big one. It's the biggest, again, as I mentioned at the top of the show, one of the biggest football games in women's basketball history. So very big tilt ahead of us. If you're South Carolina, you got to win the rebounding battle and spread the wealth on offense, right? You know, trust your teammates to make the shots, play your brand of basketball, stay loose. And I think you got this one right. You know, be ready if you're one of the guards on this squad, be ready to guard Caitlin Clark. Again, she's a generational player. She lives up to all the hype. And so, you know, you just got to be ready defensively. Again, keep getting those defensive rebounds, because if you allow Iowa to get more chances on the offensive end, it's going to be trouble, right? And then offense just has to step up for South Carolina. So big one, Mike.
Yeah, I think the big thing to me is a quote that we used earlier that we continue to hear from this team, and that's keep the main thing, right? We really didn't get into it, but it's worth mentioning just because it became a national story. Don Staley asked a question yesterday that led to a lot of conversations and dialogue and all that. There's a time and place to talk about that. I'm not going to do that right now, but I think regardless of your opinion on what Dawn said and her stance and everything in between, bottom line is this. They're getting ready for a game today, okay? And if you think back to a couple years ago, and I'm not trying to compare political topics to each other, but there was a topic about the national anthem 2 years ago, and that became a storyline leading up to their 2022 national championship game. And certainly if you paid attention to the USC all season, you would have known they weren't out there for the national anthem. But anyway, the point being is they are used to being in situations like this, championship weekend, where there are conversations and distractions and other things going on that have nothing to do with the actual game itself. X's and O's, putting the ball in the actual hoop. And I bring that up not to be insensitive to other conversations and topics out there that are very important in our country, but it's to say what Dawn and this team has said from the very beginning. Keep the main thing the main thing. They'll have time to have conversations about other topics, Bottom line is they're basketball players getting ready to play in one of the biggest games of their life, and they have a tremendous opportunity to make some history today. So, again, I think the biggest thing to me, keep the main thing the main thing. I'm sure Dawn talked to them last night saying stay off social media. Let's just focus, and we'll have a time and place to be able to talk about whatever the case may be after this. But you only have one opportunity for a lot of these players. For Cardoso, this is the last opportunity she's going to be able to have in the college level. And for some of these other players, we could have wishful thinking and say, hey, you know what? Hopefully they'll be able to get back again next season. Hopefully they'll be able to get back in 2 years, 3, whatever the case may be. But that's always wishful thinking. It's very difficult to get back to this spot. There's a reason why Asia Wilson only has one championship. There's a reason why, you put an asterisk next to it because of the COVID season, but still, there's a reason why Aaliyah Boston only has one championship. It is very difficult to get to these moments. Never mind, actually you win it. So I think South Carolina is going to be focused today. I think they, in a way, even though they're undefeated, I think they do have an us against the world mentality, and I think they're going to come out there ready to play, and they're going to get their third championship in program history.
Yeah, most definitely, Mike. I mean, again, so many storylines in this one, and, I'm certainly ready for it.
Yep, no question about it. Again, reminder, join us immediately after the game, win or lose. We will have the GC Live post-game show, and hopefully it will be a fun GC Live post-game show as South Carolina, Dawn Staley and the Gamecocks look to win their third national title in program history. Appreciate everyone that joined us today. He's intern Joe. I'm Mike Yuba, reporting live from Barbecue Home Team. Home Team Barbecue. Got that backwards. Home Team Barbecue in Columbia. Appreciate everyone that tuned in. Come on by Garnet Trust, the official watch party of the game. Enjoy today's game, everybody, and go Gamecocks.